our hospitals and our doctors and nurses, our whole health system has been turned upside down. And when you look at the figures that the World Health Organization and other very good private websites portray more accurate figures around the world, it does not justify emergency powers or a state of disaster just based on the figures. So, let's just take for granted that this virus is a real thing. No worries, I'm not arguing with that. It's about the emergency powers and the shutdown. That's what it's about. It's about how can this justify the shutting down of my business? Why are multinational companies allowed to remain open and yet your corner coffee shop has been forced to close under threat of thousands of dollars of fines?
All right, welcome everybody. Thank you for clicking the play button. I'm Jayden O'Connor. If you didn't already know, I'm the Casey candidate for Victoria in the lower house for the Great Australian Party. And join with me, I've got Darryl O'Bryan, who is also the Senate candidate for the Great Australian Party in Victoria. And he's also part of the legal team behind the Great Australian Party, and Rod Cullerton, one of the very smart minds with the law, and has been helping out Rod with the UK stuff, and also most recently with this COVID operation that we are seeing roll out across the country and the world. Where do you want to start, Darryl?
I guess give them a bit of a background on GAP. GAP's a creation of Rod Cullerton's, and as a senator in 2016 in the federal parliament, exposed the misbehaviour of the High Court and the Parliament, the federal parliament. 2016, I urge our viewers to look at the maiden question by Rod Cullerton in the federal parliament, 2016, and his maiden speech. So the maiden speech pretty much inspired the Royal Commission into the banking industry, and his maiden question pretty much shot the legs straight out from under the High Court. So a bit of an impact for a first-time senator in our parliament. So
it sure was. It was a cracking first speech. It got a standing ovation in the public gallery. It was quite a lengthy speech, but it was one of the best that I've ever heard echo in those walls of the place. It was definitely a champion speech, and it rocketed him forward to put a maiden question that took out the middle stump of Parliament.
Oh, and the High Court, because it really exposed the essentially he called for the Queen. Why the Queen? His question was specifically to the Attorney General. At the time was George Brandis. The question was, can the Attorney General please explain why the High Court rules 2004 are not consistent with the High Court of Australia Act 1979, Section 33, which insists that all process out of the High Court be in the name of the Queen.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, that was the sort of, I guess, the tip of the iceberg.
It sure was. It was quite surprising to see George Brandis's face when he asked the question.
And murmurs in the background in the Parliament.
Indeed.
Like, wow, where did that one come from?
Indeed.
And of course, this was exposing the fact that the High Court rules are inconsistent with the Constitution. So Section 73 of the Constitution And for the viewers, Section 73 is there's Chapter 3 of the Commonwealth of Australia Constitution Act 1900. Chapter 3 is the judicature, which is from sections 71 through to 80, and that defines what the courts and where the court's jurisdiction lies, and the power of the Parliament to prescribe the courts and the justices. So Section 72 keeps the justices in line and that they're answerable to the Parliament. Section 73 prescribes that the High Court rules have to be overseen and endorsed by the Parliament. This is backed up by the Judiciary Act. Judiciary Act says that, yes, the High Court justices can draft the rules of court and the regulations of court, but Parliament must enshrine them and double-check them and bring them into law.
Mm-hmm. It's all a big hand-in-hand process. We've got the Constitution, we've got the Judiciary Act, and the Acts Interpretation Act of 1901. They're all to be held hand-in-hand with each other and interpreted with each other. And it really reinforces why we have a constitution and why it is so important when all laws that are made have to be consistent with the Constitution. Now, our Constitution's not like the American Constitution, where we've got such a foundation of rights per se in our Constitution. It's more of a book to govern Parliament and how Parliament is supposed to run, and our rights are enshrined in there, but specifically section by section, they might not be listed in sections, but it's enshrined, like with the Bill of Rights, the Magna Carta and the Petition of Rights within that Constitution are all enshrined as the foundation of it. So fast forward to what we're seeing now with constitutional breaches. We've been able to pinpoint where they've been all throughout the decades. Rod's pointed them out. Yourself and Darren and Neil have pointed them out all through the decades and throughout history. And now we're coming to a point in 2020 where we're sort of looking at one of the most pinnacle times in history where things are just out of control, and this Parliament and this government and these supposed representatives are seeming to be acting whatever they like, whenever they like, without accountability. And today we are seeing a alleged pandemic, and the enforcement of rules, directives, and things alike that seem to be usurping the powers of the state parliament. Especially in Victoria, we have stage 4 lockdown, which I term as a prison term, and it seems that Dan Andrews is stepping outside of his authority as a premier of the state by enlisting the military onto the street and enforcing lockdowns of healthy people, curfews from 8 p.m. to 5 a.m. and police powers also seeming out of control with unwarranted searches, mandating the wearing of masks. Where is it in his powers that he has the right to do this, do you think, Darryl?
Essentially, he's got no powers to exercise strictly according to the Constitution of the Commonwealth. He's governor. The governor of the state has not been appointed strictly according to the law of the land. And the governor is the one that's appointed the premier after the election and the vote of the House. The House is standing ultra vires. They got rid of the Queen out of all due process, which is a legal nonsense, because the Queen is the fountain of all justice in the Commonwealth country. Australia is bound to the sovereignty of the United Kingdom through the Commonwealth of Australia Constitution Act 1900 UK, and it's through that legislation that all officers and individuals within government must operate. And the Premier and the Governor of the state, including the Governor-General, all source their power from the sovereignty within the United Kingdom, of which this is the sovereignty expressed by the Crown through the Queen.
Yeah, right.
The Parliament cannot exercise any sovereignty. Okay, the sovereignty cannot reside in the Parliament or the state as such. The sovereignty is at all times within a Commonwealth with the United Kingdom, and that's for good reason, because that sovereignty is indissoluble. And that's very clearly pointed out in the preamble to the Commonwealth of Australia Constitution Act.
Mm-hmm.
And as such, all power stems to the courts, to the Parliament, to the executive, through that Constitution. That's where their defined powers are. Now, as I just mentioned before, the High Court, when Rod Cullerton put the High Court on notice in the Parliament, what we were exposing was in the High Court rules that currently operate in Australia at the moment at 2004. Now, he exposed the fact there was no Queen in those rules. So they very quickly panicked and they inserted the word Queen, the words Queen of Australia into the High Court rules. Now, you've got to ask the question, why? What happened? Because we can go back to the High Court rules 1952 and you will see the Queen written in those rules. So the question's got to be, well, what happened between in 2004? Well, in 2003, the Section 87 of the Judiciary Act 1903, which empowered the Parliament to oversee the High Court rules, was repealed. Now, they can't do that. The repealing of Section 87 was just reflecting Section 73 of the Commonwealth Constitution, which is a guarantee that the Parliament oversees the regulations of the High Court. So Section 87 of the Judiciary Act is something the Parliament cannot touch. Okay, it's without a referendum, essentially. So they'd need to have a referendum first to say, okay, well, Parliament's no longer overseeing the High Court rules. And they'd need that permission from every state in Australia, a majority vote. This never happened. Now, Section 73 is still there, untouched. So, we're exposing here a game that they've been setting up. They've been setting up this whole new field of operation. And when Senator Cullerton exposed that, they didn't know which way to look. They didn't know where to turn. They just panicked. They threw him out. They drummed up all these charges. It was just ridiculous. They threw him into bankruptcy just to make sure.
Basically did whatever they could just to get him out of there, because he was throwing the cat amongst the pigeons, as you would say.
And here we are today in 2020, and we're confronted with this alleged pandemic. And when you look at the meaning of the word pandemic, you've only got to scratch your heads, because it just doesn't tick the box of the true meaning of the word pandemic. And then you look at those that are orchestrating these alleged powers, and the ones who are aiding and abetting these imposters, because that's all they are. They're just imposters. According to law, they're imposters. And you look at what the aiding and abetting of the media, the mainstream media, in repeating the mantra of the imposter, which is to convince people that they're to stay home, they're to wear a mask, to shut down their businesses, and beware of the dreaded coronavirus. And you've got to question that whole process, because it just does not make sense. Statistically, you cannot use the word pandemic.
Mm-hmm.
Where does that come from?
It's a good question.
You know, this is where the Premier at the moment here in Victoria, he has an obligation in the emergency powers legislation to inform Parliament and get Parliament in a situation where they can either hold his hand or say no, back off. Now, there was a Parliament sitting last week and they were screaming at the Minister for Health, and she was the only representative from the Premier's executive cabinet sitting there, and she was just fobbing these questions off, saying, yes, I'll answer those questions tomorrow.
In writing.
In writing. Yeah. And it was just not good enough.
Not good enough at all. Now, a lot of people may be saying that because of an emergency, because it's a state of a disaster, the government have these special powers. Now, I'll take you to a short clip from Avi Yemeni, where he says almost exactly that.
A state of emergency, it essentially, at least here, it essentially gives the government broad powers that override any of our fundamental human rights. I'll give you a couple of examples.
What he's saying is basically what the Parliament and the system want us to believe, that the government have, under a state of emergency, under a state of a disaster, that they have these special powers where our human rights are no longer valid. Now, I can say for certain that that's not true. There's within the Biosecurity Act 2015, there needs to be a special direction from a chief health medical officer directed to a specific person who is displaying symptoms or is sick, or a confirmed case of the virus. He continues on here and says basically that the government have special powers to do whatever they like and install whatever laws or directions that they like from unelected health officials.
The government under a state of emergency can detain anyone for as long as they want. They can prevent anyone from entering the state, as you've seen. They can give you any direction they deem necessary, even if you disagree. You must comply. They can even, under a state of emergency, enter your home, business, anywhere, search and seize anything they deem necessary without a warrant. And if they stop you on the street for any reason, they can ask you for your personal information and you have to give it to them. The list goes on and on. I think you get where I'm going.
And that's the sort of thing that is going on. People believe that sort of rhetoric and what he's saying there. I've got nothing against Avi. He seems to do a good job. He speaks well. I mean, but essentially what he's saying there is completely wrong, isn't it, Darryl?
Well, what the problem really lies in people not understanding what the true role of government is. Now, in the Emergency Powers Act, yes, the Premier has got these powers honoured. He's got to advise the Minister. He's got to advise a couple of other agents within the executive arm of government. And they've got to concur, and they've got to all agree that, yes, there is call for these emergency powers to be fired up. Well, where's that evidence? Because when we look at what's actually taking place, there's more questions than answers. And there seems to be a narrative that's being followed, which is being repeated all around the world. And you've got to ask, well, when we look at the statistics, we look at what they're doing to our hospitals, what they're doing to our businesses. Does that justify what is the emergency powers being exercised? Does that truly justify that? It doesn't. Clearly doesn't. And not enough people are asking these questions in the general public. They're just blindly accepting what is going on and just doing as they're told. We were told 2 months ago by the Chief Medical Officer, by the Premier, Dan Andrews, that it is not safe to wear a mask for the healthy. It's not safe for the healthy to wear a mask. And yet, 2 months later, it's now mandatory to wear masks. It's just a total contradiction of what they've been saying earlier. These sort of 180-degree flips should cause enough people to say, well, this is all rubbish. Please explain yourself in the light of what you were saying a little while ago. It should be enough to cause a parliamentary inquiry at the very least into what's going on. But again, you've got to fall back on the fact that these people operating these powers at the moment have not got the authority under the law of the land. The law has been specifically undermined. The power, the source of all justice in this country, the power for the parliament, the power for the executive and the courts has been removed. When you remove the Queen from all that process, the whole thing is just a legal nonsense. And people have to wake up to that. These people are acting in the position of. So our state governor is acting in the office of governor. They're not the properly appointed governor. The Premier, he's operating off powers that he hasn't been granted by the Constitution of either the state or the Commonwealth. Not enough people are asking these questions. They're just taking it for granted and listening to the rhetoric that's been put out by the media that this is a dangerous COVID-19 virus that could grab you at any time and assault you and do all these other things. And it's the only way to fix it is to look forward to a vaccine. Where'd that come from?
Yeah, mandatory across the board, mandatory vaccine, and it really is. But a lot of people are speaking up. A lot of people are really starting to sort of figure out what's going on. They're starting to look a bit deeper, look past what the media are saying, and not really listening to what the TV is telling them. Because a lot of people do have a logical mind, and I mean, I haven't met anyone that doesn't really feel like there's something else going on in the background. Now, with the alleged pandemic, as you say, the definitions of that word have changed to fit this narrative. And when you go and look at the change of that word and the definition of it, you find that the World Health Organization have changed that definition back in 2009.
Yeah, and this is when you look, and I urge the listeners to go and look at the World Health Organization website, have a look at the definition of pandemic today, and then go back and have a look at the definition of that same word 2008, 2009, and you will see there's a conflict. Mm-hmm. And this was reported on. It's on the website. Read it for yourselves and then start questioning more, because it's not about the pandemic. What we're actually suffering is, it's not a pandemic of a virus, it's a pandemic of fear.
Absolutely.
And when people can get their heads around that and they start asking questions of those who are imposing this fear, then and only then will we move forward. But otherwise, we're stagnating and looking up and waiting for the next instruction from people who are under the letter of the law. They have no authority to do or say what they're doing. In fact, what they are all falling within the confines of is a law that we inherited here in Australia, and it's a very powerful law, and it's called the Treason Felony Act 1848.
Whoa, say that one again, Darryl.
It's the Treason Felony Act.
Treason Felony Act.
Yeah, 1848, and it's Section 3. It very clearly points out where any member of government, especially puts aside the power of the Crown or the Queen or attacks it in any way, then they will fall within the confines of that section and are vulnerable to be suffer the penalties as prescribed by that Act. These people are all well and truly within the confines of Section 3 of that Act. There is no doubt about it. We have done painstaking years of FOIs to confirm through the Attorney General's departments that, yes, in fact, there is no paper trail that establishes this current regime, state or federal. As such, the Constitution's already foreseen this, and it very clearly instructs people through Section 109 of the Constitution, when a law of a state is inconsistent with the law of the Commonwealth, the former, to the extent of the inconsistency, must be seen as invalid. So the state law, where it's inconsistent with the Commonwealth law, the Commonwealth law will prevail at all times, and the state law must be seen by the reader. So it's not a court decision. It's whoever picks up that Constitution and bothers to read it, they will see it instructs them to treat it as invalid. That speaks volumes. It's also telling everybody, hey, what are you doing? Why aren't you picking this Constitution up and just educating yourself as to what government can and what it cannot do?
And
it also
that was also backed up in the High Court in 1941 or 42 by Chief Justice Latham.
Yeah, true, 100%. Chief Justice Latham really backed up Section 109. He said, just treat it as if it doesn't exist.
Yeah.
The voice of that Constitution is wanting to be heard by the Constitution's people, and that is the people of this country of Australia.
That's it.
The government are subservient to the people. The first three words in the preamble are, whereas the people. Well, there it is. That's where the authority lies. The Queen and the parliaments and the Governor-Generals and all these muppets, they are only servants to the people.
Yeah, and that's what's missing, and that's why we're doing what we're doing, is putting ourselves into a position with the Great Australian Party and Rod to represent the people, because that's what their job is. That's what we are paying them for, is to represent our voice.
Yeah, the voice of the people has been missing for too long. And for too long, when you look at the history of that Constitution, how the political party system and other foreign powers have been trying to undermine that voice, that constitutional voice, and keep the people dumbed down and just have them concentrate on what the idiot box says, or what, and today we're suffering through social media and the negatives of that.
Mm-hmm. And a fine example of that, this from Prime Minister Scott Morrison.
G'day, I'm here with Professor Kelly and John Alexander, the member for Bennelong, here in North Ryde at AstraZeneca, where we've been able to come to an agreement to ensure that Australia can be in the leading pack of getting vaccines for the coronavirus to all of our population. Now, this is a great spark of hope. There's more trials to be undertaken. It'll be manufactured here in Australia, but this is a tremendous partnership that we've been able to form, and it's going to ensure that we have hope to get to the other side of this terrible pandemic. Won't be the only agreement we enter into. but it is the first of our agreements as part of a broader strategy to ensure that Australia gets the vaccines, all 25 million of us, as well as supporting our partners in the Pacific and in Southeast Asia.
All 25 million of us and their partners in the South Pacific. I'll notice these two aren't wearing masks, but I'll just continue this.
So this is a watershed day and another very important step forward as we are moving in all fronts to ensure that Australia comes through the pandemic of the coronavirus.
Authorised by Scott Morrison, Liberal Party, Canberra.
Pandemic of the coronavirus.
Interesting. This is what we're up against. He had a press conference the same day as this video that I just showed you, and he had come out and said that he was aiming for a 95% vaccination rate across the board. We have to trust the science, and there's been cases that Darryl can even tell you about for the last 30 years. There haven't been any safety standards that have been passed, but a 95% across the board, every man, woman and child, and has since backpedaled on that not long after this conference, and has said that vaccines will never be mandatory, and has outright said the government does not make vaccinations compulsory. We cannot force vaccinations on any Australian. Our goal is to ensure comprehensive coverage as we possibly can, as we do with all critical vaccinations. I notice it doesn't say that we're not going to be coercing the people into vaccinations by withholding payments or withholding an education for your children, withholding visitation rights to the elderly in aged care homes. Darryl, I know you've been working in the background to fight all this. Not only yourself, but Serene Tefaha, GMB lawyers, with Darren Dixon as well, who's also one of the law team in the Great Australian Party, and Neil Pitchinen. All of what's previously said and done, all of that aside, what can we do? What are the people? What are we doing? And what can people do to combat this absolute mockery of a parliament and politicians that we're seeing at the moment?
Well, we've drafted up what's called a cease and desist notice. So we're encouraging people to download that form and sign it and send it. The one that's on the screen at the moment is relative to the Governor of Victoria, or the one acting in the office of Governor of Victoria. Date it and sign it, and you'll see at the bottom it's got from subject of the Queen. And of course, that's the status that brings about a protection as defined in the Constitution. And then you're serving that on these imposters. Now, this is one that's just for the Governor of Victoria, so it doesn't stop. We're intending to do one up for Governor of New South Wales, including the Governor General, because the Governor General is also would fall within the confines of this well and truly. And as you'll see in that second last paragraph, that the Treason Felony Act 1848 follows the Commonwealth of Australia Constitution Act 1900, as it is British law. Section 3 provides for the offence of denying Her Majesty's rightful title as treason. So these people have a response time that you're giving them, which is within 7 days. And the more of us that send these in to these people, the quicker this whole mess can get sorted out, because it will show up the fact that they have no authority as granted. The people have been voting for a bunch of charlatans. And in fact, the last federal parliament They actually openly swore an oath outside of the schedule in the Commonwealth Constitution and outside of Section 42 of the Constitution. They swore an oath to this Queen of Australia, this bush chook that really has no standing in the law. So pretend officers acting in the office of swearing to a bush chook that is not recognised. So what more evidence do you need that these people are running a scam? And they've managed to pretty much bring the country's small business sector into bankruptcy. Well,
causing a lot of hardship to families.
The deaths, suicides, the fact that people can't get to elective surgery,
yep.
The fact that our hospitals and our doctors and nurses, our whole health system has been turned upside down. And when you look at the figures that the World Health Organization and other very good private websites portray more accurate figures around the world, it does not justify emergency powers or a state of disaster, just based on the figures. So, let's just take for granted that this virus is a real thing. No worries, not arguing with that. It's about the emergency powers and the shutdown. That's what it's about. It's about how can this justify the shutting down of my business? Why are multinational companies allowed to remain open and yet your corner coffee shop has been forced to close under threat of thousands of dollars of fines? People taken to jail just because they're not wearing a mask that we were told 2 months ago was dangerous for healthy people. There's a semi-trailer load of evidence to say they cannot operate these emergency powers. The only way to combat this insanity that's happening all around us, especially here in Victoria, the only way to combat that is to call these people out for their authority and say, okay, prove to me, your constituent, a subject of the Queen with the full protection of the law here in this country, and that law is hundreds of years old, and it's been tested and tried in the courts and the parliament for hundreds of years. You show me you have authority, because when I go back through the history of English law, I see where similar situations have occurred in the past, and it has caused civil wars.
Mm-hmm.
And this is where either a king or whatever is going way above their assigned duty. And of course, that caused the English Parliament to then pass laws to prevent that from happening ever again. And here we are in the year 2020, and we can look back to the year 1629 and say, wow, something very similar happened back then. And there it lasted for 11 years, that tyranny. And there was Oliver Cromwell that stopped that insane exercise by King Charles I. And it was all over the imposition of a tax. God. Here we've got a situation where I can't see where in our past history a health problem has gone to such a scale. You know, we've gone through typhoids, we've gone through all these hideous diseases in our past few hundred years of modern history, you know, up to 1,000 years, and we haven't seen a reaction at government level like we're experiencing now. And people have got to get up and start exercising their power granted to them by the law to call into question those who are portraying these lies to us. Call them out for what they are.
And try and make sense out of it. Because, I mean, I've got the statistics here.
This is in the realms of insanity these people are operating in.
Big time.
They should be actually certified as insane and put out of harm's way.
Yep. I mean, look how far we've got to scroll down on this thing to get to Australia. Yeah, New Zealand here, you know, we've got to go all the way down, and we look at the stats. We've got Australia down in here. Population 24.992 million, 438 deaths, 0.00175%.
Yeah, it does not grant the powers that they're exercising, especially here in Victoria.
It's ludicrous.
It is absolutely insane. And the quicker they get hold of Dan Andrews and the governor and all of his mates and lock them up, because if they're put in front of a psychiatrist, their symptoms at the moment display that they're power hungry. People,
I think we need to get them in front of a court, in front of a grand jury. And
well, you know, grand juries were taken away here in Victoria, in Australia, essentially. Grand juries haven't been granted the right that some have said has happened. Victoria has got grand jury in its Crimes Act, but I think it's only operated twice in the last 100 years.
Yeah.
It's not a matter so much for a grand jury, although grand jury is a very good system of law, like they operate in America. You don't go to a trial unless 23 of your peers believe that there is something to answer for.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, there is still room for a grand jury, but the English law prior federation did remove access to a grand jury.
Yeah. I mean, I guess as we round out the conversation, Darryl, I think what really needs to happen is we need the support. Ultimately, we need the people behind backing these actions that we're taking with the cease and desist, with what Serene Tefahar is doing with the class actions. The more people that can get behind us, the more we can achieve. Now, we're not in this for any of our gain. It's for everybody. Now, it's not going to work unless everybody gets behind it. Donate whatever you can. Get behind however you can. Support the actions that are going forward, and we will have success.
We will.
If enough people are behind it, we will get there.
Safety in numbers.
Absolutely. Well, Darryl, I appreciate your time very much. I know you're a very busy man, and I look forward to having more conversations like this with you. And I hope that people can share this video, get it out to all your network of friends, your family, and everybody that you know on social media. Get behind the actions that we're putting forward. Get behind Great Australian Party, Rod Culledon. We are still doing a lot of things behind the scenes. And I appreciate your time, Darryl. Thank you very much.
Thanks for having me, Jayden.